Began my career as a prison chaplain in January of 1985. It was a strange calling indeed, since I didn't even know how to spell chaplain on my application. My loving wife made sure I didn't apply to be Charlie Chaplin in the prison. I soon learned the incredible love that God has for the unlovely and rejected people of our society. I became a spectator of this love and the miraculous conversion of men's hearts to Christ and His Holy Orthodox Church.
Well, overcrowding in prisons today has led to lack of meaningful programming for all the underlying mental health issues that our inmates are facing today. What we've seen is that inmates have to project a very tough exterior, leading to emotional over-control and a disconnection from self, so they're not really able to connect with what they're feeling. They're discouraged to connect with others, and it actually can impact their personal safety if they don't keep up that tough exterior. So they suppress their emotions, and an already struggling population with a lot of painful emotion to begin with. This doesn't lead to a good outcome. It leads to social withdrawal, isolation, hypervigilance, distrust. And so you think of that as the treatment picture for someone who's already struggling, incarcerated, needing to heal. They actually get a lot worse.
My name is Osama, and I served 20 years in prison. It is written in the book of Proverbs, "He who troubles his own house will inherit the wind, and the fool will be servant to the wise of heart." So it was with this sinner who, because of great trouble in his father's house growing up, and the great trouble he caused in his own house as an adult, had to serve the wise in prison. However, God in His infinite mercy granted this sinner to learn the meaning of St. Moses the Ethiopian's words, "Go sit in your cell, and your cell will teach you everything." Sitting in my cell contemplating my lot, I saw clearly the veneer of lies that I had hid behind for so many years. Who am I really, I wondered. Also, I remembered the many good Christians I had known who were still free and blessed of God. Again, I considered, what do they know that I obviously don't know? I concluded then that I needed to find the truth about myself in true faith. Thus, for the next 2 years, I fully immersed myself in self-examination and through restudy of the faith I had claimed, but not practiced, truthfully in the churches of Christ. One day I arrived in the prison chapel for a 12-step meeting. I stopped by the tract display to see if anything new had been put out. A journal, Orthodox Journey, caught my attention. I knew of the Orthodox Church, but had never had the opportunity to read any of its writings. How fortunate that this inaugural issue contained a brief summary of the Orthodox faith. As I read and studied the summary, I saw some things with which I heartily agreed, some with which I was just as heartily disagreed, and yet others which aroused my curiosity. In all this, though, an experience from my childhood was touched upon, and hope sprang up in my heart. Despite my lifelong Protestantism, I felt compelled to write and ask questions. So I wrote to the editor, Father Dwayne Peterson of the Orthodox Christian Prison Ministry. 2 years later, together with 3 other prisoners, I would be welcomed home to the Orthodox Church. At this point in my life, I had been out of prison for several years after doing my entire 20-year sentence in prison. Most of that time as an Orthodox Christian being served by the Orthodox Christian Prison Ministry. Who would have thought this sinner, a wimp and weak at heart, would have survived that many years in prison? It wasn't easy. However, 2 guiding goals have kept me focused as I continue in my Orthodox journey to find the truth about myself and to find true faith. With the help and love of OCPM, I came to understand and accept that I was responsible for being in prison. I didn't waste time or effort blaming the cops, the courts, or anyone else. Acceptance helped keep me from despondency. Also, I came to understand that keeping attention on my own sinfulness helps keep me from pride. Acceptance that my many sins are worthy of death helped me to overlook the daily offenses and sometimes serious maltreatment in prison. Thus, I turned away from anger and resentment. I would not be where I am today spiritually if not for the Orthodox Christian Prison Ministry. Among the many books and resources sent to me by OCPM was one that helped me establish a rule of prayer. By putting that booklet into practice, I came to understand the ancient maxim, the rule of prayer is the rule of faith, as well as establishing consistent and honest communication with God. One transforming resource provided by this ministry is the regular correspondence that I received while in prison. These letters were not preachy sermons telling me what I ought to believe or do. Rather, these letters were personal in nature and actually responded to what I was writing in my letters to the ministry. Through this ongoing conversation by mail, I was blessed to establish a cherished relationship with my priest and spiritual guide.
I know many times for those who haven't had the experience of going into prisons or jails, it can be a very scary proposition. It's a world that many people are unfamiliar with. But I'll say this also about prison ministry, something that it does. I think it creates a more civilized society inside that prison, inside that facility, because you have people from the outside coming in. So pastors, tear down those walls, be bold and courageous and go in there and talk to this population. You'll find it a very fertile field, I believe, and that's been my experience with it. So I would encourage them. Look, it changes not only the individuals that are incarcerated, but I think it also changes the corrections staff. It changes the entire environment within that Department of Corrections, whether it's local or state. And so I would encourage them. Take Jesus Christ into these facilities and change them.
In 1963, I was invited to be a part of the staff for a pilot project which provided 3 week-long Christian summer camp experiences for young people from juvenile hall. This began my involvement in prison ministry. Since then, it has been my privilege to correspond with and visit thousands of young men and others in prison from all over the country, many of whom have embraced the Holy Orthodox faith. One such man is Zosima, who now assists me full-time in this ministry. Here is a recent letter from a man who is beginning his journey toward Christ and his church. He writes, "I love how positive your letters start off. Pulls me right out of a bad mood every time. Your letter took 13 days to reach me. I started reading the Bible study workbook you sent me. It's slow going though. Every time I look up a scripture, I get stuck in reading the Bible and keep reading. I have never read the Bible before, so it's all so new and fascinating to me. I love it. I was sitting here the other day looking at all the postcards you've sent to me, and I wrote a short poem. Want to hear it? The mailman passed my way, turned around and said, "Hey, here's something for you." It's a postcard trimmed in blue. The sunset over the mountains, such a beautiful sight. How the red reflects off the water and sparkles so bright. Sent from a good friend, correction, make that 2. People whom I met through God, their friendship is also true. In closing his letter, he wrote, "So what do you think of my poem? I was just sitting here thinking of you and Zosima. Bye for now."
How much does God love the precious souls in prison? A personal experience from halfway around the world will help answer that question. I was at Osios Lukas Monastery in Greece, praying in their small chapel. Suddenly, in the center of the royal doors, I saw the face of a man in a supermax prison all the way back in the United States. His face was crystal clear. This man had expressed no interest in orthodoxy whatsoever. I asked God, why am I seeing the face of this man? And there was no reply from God. After returning to my chaplain's duties at that prison, I soon learned the answer. Through that event, this man eventually embraced the Orthodox faith. Father Dwayne and I had the great blessing of baptizing him, and he took the name Lucas.
Just like when you're passing that homeless person on the side of the street, you always have that moment where you judge and you wonder, am I better than he is? And then you have that moment where you empathize with them and you know that the way they got there is probably not the way that you just judged them to get there. It's the same thing, except this is a harsher punishment because not only are they homeless, but they're living in the confines of a harsh environment. And we need to love them just like we love the person on the side of the street who's asking for money. They need it too, and they don't need our judging eyes, they need our loving eyes.
Even with all the support from OCPM, it wasn't easy to be an Orthodox Christian in prison. There were very few Orthodox Christians living in the area where I was incarcerated. The closest were some 100 miles away. Consequently, there was little opportunity for fellowship and worship, except through the occasional visits from OCPM. It was difficult to keep the fasts since the available food was oftentimes inappropriate. And there was a constant struggle against the temptations inside there: alcohol, homemade wine, drugs, pornography, racism, intolerance, and so on. A monk was once asked, "What do you do in a monastery?" He replied, "We fall down and get up. We fall down and get up." Even though I often fell short, there were some people in prison who noticed I was somehow different from the other religious people they knew. Part of the difference was that I did not go around pushing my faith on others. I learned through OCPM that the faith is best presented by living it rather than by preaching it. We are to be a light to the world, not a flamethrower. The faith was always presented to me as this is what we believe, not as this is what you must believe or be condemned. Unlike my father, who abused and dominated me as a child, these fathers have shown me that God is love.
Some years ago, while visiting a prison, I met a man named Michael and I began writing him regularly. At one point, Michael wrote to me that he loved getting my letters each week and asked that I not mention God in them. For more than 20 years, I continued to write Michael without changing my style or the things I wrote about. Then one day he wrote saying that through reading the letters, he had been converted to Jesus Christ. And he wanted to be baptized into Christ and into the Holy Orthodox faith. After several attempts to schedule his baptism with the institution, Father Stephen Powley and I were finally able to baptize him. Soon after his baptism, Michael completed his first and only icon, which he sent to me. He only had a set of crayons with which to work. His precious icon remains a holy treasure to me and all who have seen it. Shortly after this, Michael's health declined rapidly, and he fell asleep in the Lord. Truly, God is patient, desiring that all would be saved.
Not only does God love these precious men and women in prison, but so do his saints. One year, just prior to Great Lent, a man overheard two Orthodox men talking about the blessings of fasting during Great Lent. Even though he knew nothing about Orthodoxy, the prisoner got excited about fasting. When Great Lent began, he quit eating everything. After 3 days of no food, in the middle of the night, he woke up, and in his words, there was a lady, brightly shining white, with a baby in her arms. She called me by name, and holding out her baby, she told me to take her baby. He said he was so scared that he threw the covers over his head, and when he peeked out, she was gone. The next night, the same exact thing happened. A bright, shining white lady calling him by name and saying, "Take my baby." The third night, it happened again. The next morning, I was making my rounds, and he related all that had happened to him. He asked me what I thought it meant. And I told him it sounded like the Mother of God wanted him to give his whole life to Christ. The next day, Metropolitan Isaiah of Denver made a pastoral visit to the prison. After listening to the man's story, he turned to me and he said, "Baptize him." I said, "Your Eminence, he isn't even a catechumen." He told me that when God speaks like this, we baptize and then we catechize. God does indeed love the precious men and women that live in the darkened world of prisons and jails across our country. Would you prayerfully consider becoming a partner with us in answering the Lord's call to all His sheep? I was in prison, and you visited me.